Brian, we're here again with Talk with America.
Terrific. Hi, Dottie. This is Brian McNaught. I'm here with my friend Dottie Berry, and Dottie and I have decided that it might be useful for folks to have a chance to periodically get together and talk about what's going on with their reaction.
Dottie and I have decided that it might be useful for folks to have.
Sorry, I turned it off, but it jumped back on of its own accord.
Well, that's the way.
Great to hear you twice, Brian.
Well, thank you, Dottie. Well, actually, I was going to say something about that tonight. Dottie and I, in a minute, Dottie's going to just talk about quick housekeeping, but we're going to spend some time tonight telling experiences that we've had in presenting or trying to educate people who were on different points of view from ours on lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues, and tell stories about what has been successful and if there's a theme to that. And I'm gonna probably start out, if Dottie, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, let me go ahead and do the little housekeeping stuff here. So I really want people to be able to know how to make comments down below. And it's really easy, but you have to know that there's a little box up there that says auto refresh. And so as long as it's checked, all the comments are going to just keep rolling up as they're made. When you're writing, what happens then if you don't uncheck that box while you're writing, you may share something fantastic with us. And then all of a sudden it disappears because it is auto refreshed. So even though I've written that up above or down below, actually, where you see the video, where you see the comments, it's right above reminding you, just uncheck that box, write what you want and post it, and we'll be able to see that. And then go back and check the auto refresh again, because, you know, you want to see what everybody else is saying as it rolls up. So anyway, we are going to do it just a little bit different tonight than we have the first couple of times, in that we are going to be sharing stories back and forth. We're not going to be going so much over to where the comments are being made and sort of bringing those comments into the live conversation. But please do share your story on there and let people read it, and we'll go back after the hangout and make some comments on that. So anyway, Brian, why don't you go ahead and sort of start it off?
Dottie, if we see a comment, right, that you know is something we want to share with the group, let's do, you know, we'll share that. But I'd appreciate it too, Dottie, if I say something you'd like me to expand on, that you say that, you know, talk more about
absolutely. I kind of keep a check on here. I have to kind of go back and forth with screens, but I'll keep a check on it.
Okay.
All right.
So, as some of you know, with my life, it's my work as an educator on lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender issues really began when I was fired for being gay at age 26 in Detroit by the Michigan Catholic newspaper. I had come out in the Detroit News as gay, and that resulted in the dropping of my weekly column, subsequent water fast, and then my termination. And I started getting requests to come and speak to groups, initially just household Bible study groups, and then women's studies groups. And it went from 11 years of college presentations, from initially just one class to a couple thousand fraternity and sorority members at UCLA, and then started in the workplace. And back in 1974, things were a little harsher and scarier than they are today. There were very few of us out, very few people who were identified as allies, not much information out. But an early lesson that I got right in the beginning was that there's no better way to move people forward than to put a face on the issue. And in the 42 years that I've been doing this work, and Dottie, I just got an inquiry for a speaking engagement. They said today, we heard you were retired. And I said, well, I was, but I'm kind of missing it. So let's talk.
We've been warming you up with it, Brian.
Yeah. So, but what I've learned from the very beginning is that if you put a face on the issue and allow people to meet you, people who perhaps have never had the experience of meeting a gay person, or people who are gay and closeted who have never heard their own story affirmed, right, or transgender, that it has extraordinary impact if, in addition to telling your story, you do so in an environment in which the people feel safe. You're not guilt tripping them. You're not saying you did this. You never put it on them that they did something that hurt you. You make it so that there's always an open window that they can, step out of if they're feeling threatened, but you don't use threatening words. And if you do that and you use words that are not always or never, they're not absolute words, then you allow for the times when what you're saying is not true. And so you're less likely to get challenged on, well, you said it always happens, when it doesn't. But what has always happened is that I've never had a bad experience. That doesn't mean that the experience didn't start out as bad. The first, in the very beginning, when I was invited to do this show up at a house, and the people brought me to the, into this living room, the woman who greeted me at the door said that, the lady in the green blazer says she's going to throw up when you walk in the room. Well, you have to remember back in 1974, people's images of a homosexual was so disgusting. It was a sex pervert who hung around children's playgrounds or indoctrinated, molested teenage boys and made them gay against their will. That was a pretty horrible image. And I just didn't, she was afraid she'd see that when I walked in. But she was
to take you home, Brian.
Well, she was the last one to leave the house that night, because what happened was that she got so excited about letting go of fear because she liked me. And she liked me despite herself, because I'm a likable person. I didn't scare her. I made her laugh. I didn't guilt trip her. I just said, okay, this is what my life has been like. And this is what discriminating words have had an impact on me. Like when the guidance counselor said, if you come into my office and tell me you're queer, I'll kick you out of the office. That was pretty scary for an 18-year-old boy to hear from the guidance counselor in an all-boys high school. So you tell those stories and let them on their own see, gee, that's awful. I would never want that to happen to my own child. And then you share with them that they also could have gay kids and not know it, as my parents didn't know it. And then I would describe what my parents were like so that it was easier for them to identify. The more you tell about yourself, the easier it is for people in the audience to identify with you. I would say that I was the middle child of 7 Irish Catholics. Well, immediately, anyone from a large family or a large Catholic family got plugged in. They listened up. I was suddenly relatable. Anybody who was from the Midwest, which I talked about, anyone whose father worked in a white collar job, all these things helped them relate to me. And then when I used a cultural reference, like Annette Funicello, who was a Mouseketeer, that young kids today have no idea who she is, but boy, people in the baby boomer generation sure could relate to her. And they would smile when I mentioned her name, but I was making a point, that I wasn't attracted to her, and all my male friends were. And that let me know that there was a secret I couldn't tell with anybody. Well, then some scarier situations that happened to me was that I was in a third shift, and I talked about this on my Facebook page, and I said that I would tell people tonight, how I handled it and what I did. I was in a third shift factory setting, and there was a guy in the group who was supposedly gay but wouldn't come out of the closet. And I was talking to him in his work group. This is the midnight shift. And during an exercise that I was conducting with my friend Pam Wilson, this guy said, well, if anyone told me they were gay, I couldn't guarantee they wouldn't lose their hands in a machine. And that was a really scary thing to hear anyone say out loud. Right? I wasn't used to hearing such things because I came from, sort of a polite upper middle class family, and you didn't say things like that. Those things were more likely to be said where, in factories or blue collar jobs where people say whatever they want to say, but they also have tougher skins than I did. Well, I watched how the guy's colleagues looked at him with new eyes, and they became instantly protective of the gay guy in the room that hadn't come out. Before it was us versus him. And then when suddenly somebody said something so awful, they moved not physically, but emotionally around him. And so I watched this guy who made that awful comment. I didn't know who the gay person was. And I told my story. And while I told my story of growing up, with this secret of being gay and being terrified and drinking paint thinner because I was so scared that I had no future, and I watched him start to pay close attention to me. Before he looked at the floor, or just shook his head no, and suddenly he looked up at me, and he continued to look up at me as I continued to tell what my life had been like and how I had moved from self-shame to self-love and affirmation and actually celebration. Well, we finished the workshop and I went home, and the next day I got a telephone call from the office manager who said, you need to know what happened after you guys left. He said, the guy who said, I couldn't care they wouldn't lose their hands in a machine, walked up to the guy who was gay and said, are you gay? And the guy who was gay, who felt so excited because the workshop was all about him, and here this gay guy in the front of the room was making everyone laugh, and they liked him, and they were making positive comments. So he got so excited that he said for the first time, yeah, I'm gay. And the other guy said, well, I'm really sorry for all the stuff that I've said. I'm really sorry for scaring and hurting you. Now, so, we feel like these awful guys out there, and we often point at heterosexual white men as the enemy, which is unfair, but we think they can't ever turn around, that they're always going to be mean and hateful. But if you address their humanity and you don't label them as mean and hateful, and you talk to them as a human being, they'll listen to you. And especially if you say, look, I'm not trying to change your religious beliefs. You can believe whatever you want to as your moral code. You can believe that it's an abomination to engage in homosexual sex, but you have to separate me from what you're condemning, because, you and your faith say that you love the sinner. So I'm giving you an opportunity at this point to love me. You can dislike what I do in the privacy of my home, but that's not what this is about. This is about me and me working with you, and can you be friendly to me on a day-to-day basis? I had another experience, Dottie, just along the same line, where I was working with a group of people, and I was in the middle of my guided imagery, which is where I was one of the second most powerful exercises that I used to do, where I'd have the audience close their eyes and imagine themselves growing up straight, but in a gay household, going to gay schools and gay dances, right, and gay movies with gay dates. And they have to kiss their gay date goodnight, which let them feel the squirming and the discomfort that we gay people felt going through that charade growing up. And in the middle of it, in this most effective exercise that I had done for years and years and had completely incredible positive responses from people about, this guy, while everyone's eyes are supposed to be closed, yells out, "Stop this shit." And I was so shocked. I'd never had anyone talk to me like that, right? And I looked up and I looked at him and I said, I am going to finish this exercise. You know, what happened for me at that moment was that I refused to feel bullied by a straight white man who disapproved of me. Well, I made a mistake in doing that. I should have, as I got more mature in my training, I would have known, stop right where you are, because no one's going to be listening for the rest of the exercise. Everyone's going to be thinking, why did that guy say that? And what's this guy going to say? And are we going to get in trouble? And I don't even remember what he was talking about with this gay exercise. So afterwards, I started to process it. And what I was told was, these people hadn't been told what the subject of the workshop was.
Oh, my goodness.
They came in cold. And so I said, you're kidding. And they said, no, not only that, they had had an incident where a lesbian in their group had complained about poor treatment. And so they thought I was there to correct them and punish them and blame them.
Oh, my goodness.
And they were defensive. And so when they saw me say, oh, wait a second, I had no idea that you didn't know. And it was terribly unfair, to send you people in here without knowing what was going on. And it was terribly unfair to send me in here without knowing that you didn't know what I was talking about. My approach would have been very different from the beginning. Sure. And I would have had the opportunity to bring you to the point where you could have listened to the guided imagery. So I understand why, even though I would challenge your method, I understand why you were so upset and couldn't relate to the exercise. But I do need to share with you that I've never seen a group of people less engaged than you all have been. You're reading the newspaper in the back of the room. Your feet are up on chairs. Well, suddenly everyone put their newspapers down and took their feet off the chairs. So I said, let's start over again. Well, at the end of the workshop, I went to their manager and I said, you know what you did? I said, this is what happened as a result. And I was going to be doing the same workshop for the rest of their group the next day. I said, I want every one of you senior managers in the front row tomorrow. Or I'm not coming. And I want every one of your people to be told in advance why I'm there. Right? Well, it was standing room only.
Oh,
and everybody who was there was attentive and responsive. And it was completely different than the day before, because I certainly was different because I know my audience if I'm told who they are. Plus, they didn't feel like I was coming down on them. They knew I was there to help them. And they also knew that the bosses were invested. The day before, the bosses introduced me and walked out. Here they sat down and listened. So the impression they got was not, okay, you guys, I don't need to hear this, but you do, right?
Exactly.
So how I turned the group around again that day when they were so disruptive is after I heard from them what they were feeling and why they were feeling what they were feeling, and that I understood, I told them my story. And they were open to hearing it, and it moved them. Right? And it will move you if you feel like you're being treated as a human being and not as the enemy. And I say all of this, and then I want to stop and see if you have any comments or questions and have you tell some stories. But I say all of this on the eve of the inauguration of Donald Trump, when the majority of the country is very uptight, right? Even some Trump voters are uptight because the majority of us did not vote for him, and the majority of us do not support his and his cabinet picks values, we're sitting there thinking, first of all, we've left Camelot and gone to Dogpatch. What are we going to do? What are we going to do for the next 4 years? And how are we going to deal with these people from our families and group of neighbors who voted for him? How do we approach them? And some of us, having spent 40 years doing this work, feel like, I don't want to go back and do it all over again.
Yeah,
I've done it, you know? But we have to realize that just because we did it, we didn't do it with these people. We got to start all over. We got a new group.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of people who we worked with now behind us. They're our allies. They're in the Senate. They're in the Supreme Court. They're in newspapers. They're in medical associations. They're among the clergy. But we've got a lot of people who need to be helped along on why it's important, for instance, that a transgender person gets to use the restroom, you know, that represents his or her gender. You know, I watched a movie today, Ray and I went to see Hidden Figures.
Oh, love it.
About the brilliant black women who were at the NSA who enabled the US to be successful in their space shuttle program. Well, the black woman who was the one person who got to work with these white engineers walked a half a mile in the rain to go to the bathroom, back and forth, over and over. And the boss couldn't understand, why are you taking 40 minutes to go do what you're doing? Well, she said, they don't have any colored bathrooms, you know, in this building. So he understood that, was shocked, and tore the sign down for colored restrooms. Well, we have to help people understand by telling personal stories, as she did, on why transgender people need our support and not having to walk to the other side of the factory to go to the bathroom. But we have to start all over again, and we have to do it with kindness and an open heart and an unclenched fist. And that's really hard to do when you're threatened, because part of me has that fist closed saying, you know, you better think you're not getting past me.
Yeah.
The other part wants to say, you know, peace, brother and sister.
Brian, you are so correct. And these are just great examples, I think, that people are going to be able to use and take into today's world, because this is what we are dealing with. It is a new group, but what I'm already finding is that the same things that worked then work now.
Yes.
What doesn't work is trying to ramrod people and causing them to become defensive, because we always found that, you know, if you defend, we're further apart.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and share a story then first, before I do want to, first of all, welcome Robin. Hi, Robin, my wife, Robin. How are you?
Hello.
Hi, Robin.
Hi.
And she's going to share a story in a minute too, you know, about some situations we came up against. But since I predate some of her things, I'll start off. How about that? And, you know, Brian, I like to think of you and I as what I call accidental trainers, which means that the way we actually initially became trainers is a situation happened and we spoke up. And that's the same thing that happened with me, a different situation. So I'm going to kind of share what it was. It was back in 1985, 86. Now, this is after your situation, Brian. But, you know, in Lexington, Kentucky at that time, it was still pretty conservative, to say the least. And so I was in Leadership Lexington that year. We had a Minority Issues Day, and, you know, it got to a point where they were talking about gay people, and there was a gentleman that stood up in the back of the room, and because they were talking about us teaching children and so forth, and he stood up, and he took up a lot of space. Okay. He was a guy that scared people a little bit sometimes in class. You know, he's pretty outspoken, but really a nice guy too, you know, that kind of combination. And so he said, well, I hear what you say about those gay people, but I don't want them teaching my children. Well, Brian, Robbie knows this, but I got to tell you, I was sitting on the front row, and I had a nanosecond to make a decision about my life in that moment. And I got up out of my seat and I turned around. And so get this, when I'm on the front row and he's on the back, I'm facing the whole class. You have about 50 leaders in Leadership Lexington that year. And I looked at him and I called him by name and I said, you know, probably most of you know that I'm a gay person in this community, which I found out later, everybody's jaw dropped because they didn't. But I said, I won't be held by fear. I said, I was a teacher and I was a damn good teacher. I said, if you wouldn't let your child be taught by me, it would be their loss, not mine. And I sat down. Well, about 10 minutes later came the lunch break. And I think it was probably the longest walk he ever made in front of people. But he came in this area where we had our lunches and I was sitting with several people, and he walked all the way across to be able to say something to me. And he looked at me and he said, Dottie, I'm sorry, I didn't know I was talking about you. And I looked up at him and I said, called him by name. And I said, you know, you don't need to apologize to me. I said, I would need to apologize to you if I hadn't had the courage to stand up and let you know that I'm the person you're talking about. So Brian, it goes right back to putting a face on an issue.
Right.
He thought he could say this in class and that there was nobody in this class that was gay.
Uh-huh.
And you can't imagine, but that caused quite a stir in the community of Lexington, Kentucky. I call it the ripple effect. First of all, when I was leaving that day and I was in the parking lot, one of the members of the class came up and thanked me. I could have said with 99% certainty that she was lesbian, but she had never said that. And all she said was, thank you for standing up for us. And it was probably 5 or 6 years later before she officially came out to me. But that kind of started a process. I went home and I shared with my partner at the time what had happened. And she was the executive vice president of a bank. She was also going to be the president of Big Brothers Big Sisters the next year, of which we were both a part. She looked at me, she said, I don't think we've heard the last of this. Indeed, we hadn't. I ended up getting put out of Big Brothers Big Sisters. She was denied the opportunity to be the president. When they had the meeting to pull things together about this, they called her and said, first of all, they said, you probably don't want to attend this meeting. The person who did know we were together. The other people, Brian, it's kind of one of those things where they weren't told. And Barbara said, oh, I wouldn't miss this meeting for anything. So she went to the meeting and none of the other people had been told, except for there was a person in Leadership Lexington who stood up, said they were gay and that they have a little sister in the Big Brothers Big Sisters. And what are we going to do with this? And so there they sit and they said, oh, this is the most awful thing. And didn't even know that they were talking about the partner of Barbara. So at that point, she then had to stand up and say, I think you should know that the person you're talking about is the person that's my partner. And of course, it started all over again, Brian. They all ran up to her. Oh, Barbara, we didn't know we were talking about you.
Right.
And so, you know, it goes on and on. But I had so many great conversations, and I say the accidental trainer out of that, because that's what started my training career. You know, there was nobody else in Lexington that would even come and speak at Leadership Lexington. So, you know, during that, I would go and, you know, sort of tell the story each year. And I couldn't get anybody else to do it. And then at the UK, they started having me to do diversity training, you know, for the people who were in charge in the dormitories and things like that. And Brian, you'll appreciate this, but I always shared that sort of 15-minute visualization, you know, where they had to get in and occupy the body of the person who is straight growing up in a gay world, you know, with gay parents. And I'm telling you, it was so powerful time and time again. And so then out of that, being that accidental trainer, I began to do that for corporations and sort of the things in a similar way that you did. But what I can share with you that happened is last April, it was the 30th anniversary of my Leadership Lexington standing up and things that happened. And they invited me back to tell that story of what happened in Leadership Lexington. And they just, you know, it's like today they can't even believe that happened. Now, I will tell you that I never, when I retold the story, I did not tell the name of the gentleman, you know, because he wasn't there. I did call him up and invite him to be there, but I never did hear from him. But I felt like I wanted to make sure that I called him up and invited him to be there because, you know, I don't know how he might have changed through the years. You know, I can't make assumptions because what I know is when we put our face to an issue, things really change in a major way. And that totally set the course for my life because in Lexington, Kentucky, not too many people were wanting to tell they were gay. And I was told, because I had left just a couple of years before that, being a coach at the University of Kentucky, and I was pretty well known, had started my own business, and I was told you'll never be successful. And I just said, watch me. And our business ended up being the Chamber of Commerce Small Business of the Year, and then eventually was the Small Business of the Year in the United States. And I guess my real point out of this story, Brian, is that there are moments in our lives, in a nanosecond, we have a chance to make a decision. To either be, have people have power over us or to be empowered. And I can tell you that that day I stepped into my power in that way, and I never looked back. And I never had to. And consequently, I lived a much different life than many of my friends lived because they were still scared, you know. And some of them were scared of me, to be quite honest. You know, they're like, gosh, the fact that I was known, they thought if they hung out, maybe somebody they would know about them. Most of the people already knew about them. They'd ask me, well, what about so-and-so? I'd say, well, if that's really of interest to you, I think you should go talk to them. You know, that's not my story to tell. My story is only my story to tell. So it's been pretty remarkable through the years. But then, of course, my wonderful wife, Robin, we decided to take a year-long journey around the country in 2005 and 6. And part of the reason for that was, again, to put a face to an issue. We were just like, our country's better than this. And, you know, Brian, when you talk about telling about it yourselves, when we would tell people, look, we come from conservative, very, very conservative Christian homes, that sort of made people do this, you know, like, wow, we may have something in common. So we didn't try to threaten them like you're talking about, because we knew, again, if we did something that made them have to defend who they are, we lost. And it's the same way today as we look at really connecting with people again in new groups and what we're going through in our country. If I say something that totally makes them have to defend their position, who they are, I'm telling you, it didn't work then. It hasn't worked now. And if we want to really connect with people, we've got to do it in the realm of ways that you suggested. So anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. And right,
Dottie.
Yeah.
What you did in that workshop where that presentation where you stood up and spoke to that man, in my experience, the times that happened in my own workshops where somebody came out, when the person comes out of your group, it's more powerful than an outsider coming in to tell his or her story. My story was valuable because no one else was telling their story. Right. But if you have people in the workplace who are willing to speak up, that has a powerful effect. In fact, in surveys, we've shown that people who have openly gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender people in their workplace are far more supportive than people who don't.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, and here's what I can tell you. When I did that, I didn't know it's going to be kind of like a part of history. You know what I'm saying? It's only looking back that I realized, gosh, I was a part of history in that era. And I can't tell you how many people from my class, got together with some of them, told me how that had impacted their life. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you. And that's very humbling. I don't say that like, hey, you know, look at me. I'm just saying that's very humbling to know that something I did just because I felt like it was the right thing to do and standing up impacted their life and the way they taught their children even. Grace, who was sitting next to me when we went to dinner, she said, you know, my daughter's in theater. She said, and if I had not known you, she says, I'm not sure how I would talk to her. And I don't know how she would have adjusted to the lot of people she's met through theater. Because she was one of the ones who said, Dottie, my jaw, if you could have been looking at me, my jaw had hit the floor when you said, I guess most of you know that I'm gay. And she said, I had no clue. So it is very interesting, you know, to sort of look back and see those kind of situations. And so, Robbie, I know you've got a story to share about our journey. Gosh, we had so many, but this is a really unique story. So I'm going to let you have it.
Yeah, so we were on the journey, Gay into Straight America, and our mission was to engage hearts and minds and to create authentic connections with the hope of transcending differences that separate us. And like Dottie always says, we live our life without being attached to a specific outcome, which is not always easy to do. What happened was we were in Missouri, Columbia, Missouri, and our car had broken down, and we had to take it into the shop and get it fixed. And as we were taking it out, I was filling it up with gas. Now you have to understand, we had this big purple Suburban, a Chevy Suburban that had big, huge signs on both sides, the driver's side, the passenger side, and on the back, that said gayintostraightamerica.com. And it was a picture of two women and a poodle. And then it said at the bottom, 2 women and a poodle. And with the trailer hooked up that we traveled with for a year, 13-foot Scotty trailer, people really couldn't see the sign in the back so well, but they could really see the signs on the side. Well, this particular day, we didn't have the trailer hooked up. So getting gas, this guy pulls up behind me in the gas station. And before he even went to his pump to pump his gas, he stormed into my face while I was pumping my gas and said very aggressively, "Excuse me, what is gayintostraightamerica.com?" And we always laugh about the fact that I'm not sure why the .com mattered in that moment. But but I knew, just as Dottie said previously, I knew I had a split second to make the right or the wrong choice. And so I kind of took a step back from his face and I said, "Well, thank you for asking." I said, "Well, this is a journey that my wife and I are taking, and we're traveling around the country with the intent to engage hearts and minds, create authentic connections, and transcend differences that separate us." And he said, "Well, I am a Christian, and I have a really hard time with this." And I said, "Oh," I said, and I reached out my hand and I said, "What's your name?" And he said, "My name is Joe." And I said, "Joe, I'm Robbie." And I said, "And as a matter of fact, we're people of faith too. So thank you for asking." And I said, "Joe, would you like to come over and meet my spouse, Dottie? She's right over there. She's the queen." And so it's like, it was like 10 degrees. Actually, it was probably 2 degrees outside. And since she's the queen, she was sitting in a friend's car keeping warm. I said, "Would you like to come over and meet her? I would love for her to meet you." And so he looked at me and he kind of just like, you know, groaned or something. He wasn't happy about this. He didn't want to engage with me, but he couldn't help himself. And so before I know it, this big burly guy with big facial hair and everything that was quite scary to me. I felt very threatened by him initially. This guy and I are walking across the parking lot of this gas station over to to the car where Dottie's sitting. And I've got my arm interlocked with his, and he's coming with me happily. And so, well, I say happily, he's coming with me. He's agreeing to come with me, but you can still tell that there's still anger in his whole being. So we get over to Dottie. I say, "Joe, this is my wife, Dottie. Dottie, this is Joe. And so we start to engage in a conversation with him. Dottie starts asking him personal questions about himself. Do you have any kids? Are you married? What do you do for work? Robbie said you're a Christian. What church do you go to? Et cetera, et cetera. So we started just having a real conversation. Well, a few minutes into this conversation, and he's sharing readily. A few minutes into this conversation, he says, he said, I go to the Baptist church just up the road here. And he said, there's this person that comes to my church and I get angry every time they enter the door. They're a man that wears a dress. And people like that should not be allowed to come into church, my church. And Dottie said, well, thank you for sharing that, Joe. As a matter of fact, I work very closely in the transgender community, and some of our closest friends are transgender people, and they're the most beautiful people, and they have taught us so much about how to love and how to be loved, and how much more alike we are than we are different. And he thought about it. Conversation continues. We share more stories, and then he says, he said, do y'all have any literature you can share with me? I think there are some things that I just don't quite understand. And we were like, of course we do. Thank you for asking. And we gave him our information, how he could contact us, and we would send it. We don't send people information that they don't ask for, unsolicited. We don't do that. But he asked for it. And after we gave him some information and how to contact us and get some more information and understand us better, he said, you know what? He said, I'm going to my church right now to meet with my pastor. He said, we have a conversation to have.
Isn't that great? Yes,
it was so amazing. And, I always tell people, I doubt that Joe went to his pastor that day after having an engaging conversation with us. I doubt that he went and said, Pastor, I have been transformed, and we need to start a PFLAG meeting in our church tomorrow. And we need to become an affirming and welcoming church. I don't know that he did that. I doubt that he did that. But the real beauty in this whole story is the fact that we had an engaging conversation with Joe, and that conversation allowed him to shift even ever so slightly to where he had more questions that he wanted answered, and he was willing to be open to learning some new information that he didn't have an understanding about before. It was an amazing time. And I got back into the Suburban. And this is a neat part of the story too, was that when Joe, we hugged him at the end, and he gladly hugged us back, held us tight, and thanked us for talking with him. And when he walked back across that gas station parking lot to go finally pump the gas in his car, his waiting car, he looked like an entirely different man. He was walking tall. He looked like he was changed in some way, just physically. He looked that way, just the way he carried himself after that conversation.
Well, it's a spiritual experience for people.
Yes.
They go beyond themselves to a point that they never expected to have happen in their lives. They felt meaning in their lives in a way that maybe hadn't happened before. A human connection, an intimacy. Sometimes people feel more intimacy with us who tell our stories than they have with their siblings for years, or even their spouses, because when you tell your story, you become vulnerable. And when you become vulnerable, they're allowed to be vulnerable. And if they're allowed to be vulnerable, it may be the first time in their life or for many years that they feel that they've ever had the chance to be vulnerable, especially this guy growing up where you were. Incidentally, I want to tell you how brave you guys were, especially driving around in a purple car.
That's our favorite color,
Yeah. Well,
I know it did kind of attract attention. Hey, one thing, Robbie, I was going to ask you to tell about Joe too, is remember when he said that sometimes he didn't quite feel accepted because why?
Right, because he was Latino.
Yeah.
Oh.
Man.
And
Well, that's what happens, as you know, is that when you tell your own story, even though the other person may not be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, they'll come up and say, you know what? I'm not gay, but I can relate to your story because, you know, I grew up fat, or I grew up, you know, they'll whisper, I was abused, or something that makes them feel isolated from everyone else. And one of the things that I used to say in my college talks a lot was, you know, that when I die, I expect to hear the question, did you sing the song I taught you? And, you know, everyone is called to sing their own song, and it's not the same. You know, we all have a different song to sing. And the challenge is for me not to sing yours, but for me to sing mine and to find a place where I'm free to sing it without interruption or criticism.
Right. Yeah. Good. Thank you, Brian. That's all good stuff. And that's exactly what happened with Joe. Was he felt validated, and then he was able to be more open to hearing our story.
Right.
Remember, Robbie, when he said that sometimes he didn't feel like he quite fit in, rather than saying to him, well, Joe, you just scared the you-know-what out of Robbie here coming up like that, I looked at him and I said, Joe, I can really tell that you've got a really tender part of you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And, oh my gosh. You should have seen him. And I meant that because I had seen it. I didn't make up something I had not yet seen. Because
he melted like butter.
What's that?
He melted like butter.
He did melt like butter. But,
Dottie,
yeah.
Dottie, do we have any comments? I want to make sure that in the 10 minutes that we have left,
go over here and check.
We don't miss anyone's input.
Let me just kind of see here what we got going on.
While you're looking, I'll say that I had a similar situation. As you know, I've written about it and spoken about it, sitting next to a fundamentalist Christian on an airplane, you know, who was well known throughout the country for being a fundamentalist Christian businessman. And after I ended up telling him my story at his request, he said, you know, I know that God had you sit next to me, and I'll never think about this issue in the same way again.
Wow.
It's over and over and over again. I've had those experiences, which always made the work worthwhile. And it's actually what I've missed since pulling back from traveling to speak. I've missed that human exchange face to face with people, because it was so enriching to me personally. Yeah. And like you, Dottie, I didn't take, and you, Robin, I didn't take any personal credit for it. You know, I get excited in telling the stories, but I've always felt that, you know, I was just a vessel for, and that if I got in the way, if my ego got in the way, that my power would I'd lose my power. But if I stayed out of the way, what you're doing is channeling love and acceptance. And there's not a person in the world who does not want that as love and acceptance.
You know, Brian, that's what we found from the journey is people sometimes would say to us, I guess you all are just worn out from all that. And, you know, when we put our head on the pillow at night, it was so amazing. Our energy didn't leave us. The energy was filled up, you know, because that exchange of love it's like having your gas tank filled up all the time. You know, that was not a bad thing. And you know, Robbie, you always say it so well about people were gesturing at us going down the road, and then we'll share a little something from comments over there. But tell what happened when we were going down the road.
Yeah. So, you know, you can imagine these lesbians with a beautiful black standard poodle are traveling across the country in this big old purple Suburban with signs on the car, and you can imagine people would give you some looks and stares and gestures while driving on the freeways, etc. And when we speak, I tell people, you can imagine the gestures we might get, and everyone nods their head like, oh yeah, I can just imagine. And then I say, You want to know what they were? And that people like look, waiting, and I say,
thumbs up. Yeah.
up. Honks,
Yeah.
honks, thumbs up, waves, you know, thank you, this kind of a thing.
We often create nightmares that don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so many of the things we feared while we were in the closet didn't come true. Now, some did. You know, some people were kicked out of their home or, you know, abused by their parents for saying they were gay. But a lot of us were delightfully surprised with the loving kindness that we received from people in telling them our stories.
You know, Brian, what I found was that the more I loved myself, the more that transmitted.
Right.
So I think
what I found, go ahead, Daddy.
It's a good thing to remember right now, though, because there's a lot of things that, you know, people are fearing might happen. And again, we can never say that some of those things might not happen. But as we've talked about this, you know, having a fear and becoming self-identified with fear over these next few years or these next few months or whatever is the distinction. And there's a lot of things we're talking about here, the way we carry ourselves, the way we engage with people, that we've got to feel like there's ways that we can make a difference. And I think in our communities, that's what's so crucial and so important. I do want to go over here because Rudy had a comment, and then I want to just share this. Rudy said, when I came out to my spiritual director at the seminary, he asked me how I would minister to a gay or lesbian person who came to me for counseling. I told him I would approach that situation with the love and compassion of Jesus. He responded that perhaps I should not be in the seminary. At our next meeting, I told him that I had considered what he had said, but I would not leave the seminary. I felt that God had called me, and to ignore that call would not be fair to either the church or to me. He smiled and said, "Good for you. I hoped that you would come to that conclusion." I was pleased with his response.
Yeah, because the seminary is not a place for anyone who wants to express the love of Jesus.
It could be a scary thing. And so, you know, anyway, he and Kathy Siebert are over there having some exchanges about that, and we'll be able to go and read some of that.
Yeah, both of them were seminary students, Kathy being at the Pacific School of Religion.
Okay, great.
Cool.
So this is, you know, our hope is that as people come on to here and, you know, they listen to this particular one, that you will share your stories right there in the comments, because it's so important. And you know, for people, you know, that might get something out of this, then just have them go to talkwithamerica.com and they'll be able to see this recording until our next live hangout, whenever that might be.
Right.
So Brian, what about some more? I know you've got some.
Well, one of the things,
ones.
Yeah, Dottie, one of the things I wanted to say was that in the next several weeks, months, years, we have to be prepared for other people from our communities using tactics or saying things we don't agree with. And they're certainly going to say things, or we're going to say things that they disagree with our style. You know, for years, there were other gay leaders that dismissed me because they thought I was an apologist. Rather than, you know, seeing me as someone who was building bridges, they wanted to, you know, throw stones, be angry, have their fists clenched. I was having, you know, more success and lasting longer doing what I was doing than they were in their style, but everyone's got to use their own style.
Yeah.
You know, a friend of ours on Facebook said that she hasn't found telling her story effective. And, you know, so I say, you can't talk someone into doing it. Yeah. I can only tell you from my experience that the most powerful way to make an ally is to put a face on the issue. You know, as the movies we go to do for us. You know, we don't understand segregation unless somebody teaches us about it. We don't know it instinctively. We've got to be shown what it was like. And the other thing, Dottie, that I feel very strongly about is that we need to share with people the impact of behaviors on us, not your behavior. You cannot say this is how you made me feel.
Right.
As people in successful marriages know, you don't say you did this to me.
Yeah.
You say, this is how I feel. This is what, this is, and we can't argue with people's feelings. You can,
exactly.
right? So when I share with people, this is how I felt. I felt like I didn't belong. I felt like I shouldn't live. I felt like I would never succeed to be happy. That they have had similar feelings for different reasons, and that's how we connect.
Yeah.
One to one. Yeah.
That when you're talking about feelings, I used to give that example. I'd say, if Robbie said to me, I feel sick, I might be able to look at her and say, God, you look great for feeling sick. But I couldn't tell her you don't feel sick.
Right.
That's her reality. And right. I think that's just such a great reminder, even right now when we're trying to, not just have dialogue, but to come together in some loving spirit, with people right now that are, feel differently than we do. And
I love the story of the kid who said to his mother, I'm gay. And she said, you are not. Who told you that?
Oh my gosh. Oh, well, Brian, it reminds me of my dad. We were in Franklin, Georgia at their place down on the lake and everything. And we were standing across this bush. And my mom later reminded me when I wrote a story and shared with her that I had called the bush by the wrong name if I was really trying to get my facts straight. I don't know if it was maybe it was a blueberry bush. Maybe I said a blackberry bush. I don't know. But when I told my dad, he looked at me and he said, well, you can't be happy. And I said, well, I am happy. He said, well, you can't be, and this went back and forth, a few times, and that kind of makes me chuckle. It's kind of the same scenario is.
Right. Do you have a right to be
happy? Let me tell you something.
Right.
It just wasn't working that way. So
Ray used to say that when he was growing up, he would say, I'd say, I'm angry. And his mother would say, you are not.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's a whole nother conversation, Brian, because I didn't grow up even knowing that anger was okay. I thought anger was a very bad thing because my dad said, kill him with kindness. And bless his heart, he did some things with that one that were sometimes not so good in the way that it came across. But I didn't understand that anger is an emotion that can be used in a positive way. I'll never forget when I was touring the Martin Luther King Center for the first time, and Rodney and I were there. He was a young man who took a seat at the lunch counter, and he was seeing some of that for the first time in the movie, that he experienced. And he just cried, and I cried. And sometimes I would get so frustrated with how, maybe how people were doing. He looked at me one day, he said, Dottie, do you really think that everybody in our community agreed with us and the way we were going about doing things? He said, oh my goodness. They would say, Rodney, now you just need to quit doing this kind of stuff because we've got a good job and you're just trying to move things too fast. So, no matter where we're at, people's fears are their fears, and they come up at many different times. I know one of the things I always tried to do with my mother is to let her know when I was going to be arrested for active civil disobedience. And when we were getting arrested at Focus on the Family, Dr. Dobson, when Robbie and I were going to do that, my mother sort of exasperated said, I just don't know why you want to do this. So I thought, what can I do right now that she could identify with? So I didn't want to argue with her about that. So I said, Mom, do you like to vote? She said, yeah, I like to vote. I said, would you like to give up that right to vote? She said, no. I said, well, do you know that there are wives of senators who actually at one point chained themselves to the White House fence? And their husbands were upset. They were saying, you need to come home. And then they were arrested and they were force fed. And so my mom said, well, it's just not my way. And I said, Mom, I get that. And that's okay. But it is my way because I feel like I'm called to do something, you know. And my call was to do that nonviolent process. And, you know, I was humbled by sitting in jail next to somebody who went through the civil rights era and had been beaten. And I didn't feel like I was necessarily risking that, you know, although a lot of our community has been beaten and we never know when that might happen. But you know what I'm saying? They had really put themselves on the line. And I felt like they had put themselves on the line for me, not just for them. Our country's better for what they did.
That's right.
So we have all these kind of experiences
We do.
along the way and the stories. And
but we need to say goodnight.
yeah, we do. We're right on that hour. And anything else you want to share, Robbie, before we close up?
No, thank you for having me on with you. It was fun. Tomorrow's the big day.
Yeah.
And I think that we can I'm just having gone through this conversation with you and Brian tonight, just reminded of what the things that I need to do, remembering to engage with people in regards to the new presidency rather than to defend. We just need to bring people closer. Love wins.
There you go.
Does win.
So,
All right,
Brian,
Miss
we'll let
Dottie.
you end it up then. Anything else?
No, we'll just, if we decide that this is useful to others and that we're having fun doing it, we'll do another one. But one of the things that you and I are allowed to do is change your mind and not do a schedule, right?
There you go.
Robin, thank you for your sharing tonight. It was really, really great.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you for
And
the opportunity.
appreciate you too, Brian. And we're going to close it out now.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. Good night, Dottie.
Everybody, bye-bye.
Thank you, Dottie.
You're welcome.